Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I don't see the participants number growing anymore, so I think everybody managed to get in more or less. Welcome warmly. I'm Anu Nuutinen from the Academy of Finland, and I will be hosting this webinar. I'm really happy to see 40 participants with us today, and a special welcome to all of you who are here for the first time. So EOSC Forum Finland has been organizing a couple of webinars, but we are especially happy to see newcomers. And today, the topic will be especially why to get engaged, and what can the EOSC Association and joining the EOSC Association provide for your organization and your researchers, your teaching staff. I'm really happy to present our guest, Karel Luyben, who is the president of the EOSC Association, and he will kind of introduce the topic and tell about what is going on at the moment, and also why you should or should maybe consider joining, and what kind of benefits that could give you. And then we have, at the end of the webinar, very good time for questions. So you can ask, obviously, Karel, but also colleagues from CSC who have been organizing this, and of course, maybe even other participating members. So please send in your questions. You can use the chat. We will be following that, and you can also already start posting the questions while Karel is giving his presentation. But without any longer introductions, let's get the show started. One practical thing, as you all notice, we are recording this webinar. So Karel, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anu, for this invitation. I will start sharing my screen. Let's see if that works. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Well, again, thank you for the invitation to present to the Finnish Forum today. I'm a member of the Aalto University Foundation Board and traveled to Finland, well, about 8 times a year normally, and I'm really missing this in the Corona period. So this is compensating a little bit for that, I would say. It's always a pleasure to work with you. Let me start by 2 definitions, because I assume my audience is, let's say, rather heterogeneous with respect to being involved more and being involved less with respect to open science and EOSC, and therefore I introduce a few items before. First, the definition of open science as we use it in the Netherlands, and we have accepted with the steering group in the Netherlands this definition, where we say open science is a transition where we move from science as it was, already quite a bit of movement has been made, to science as it should be or could be and will be in the future, which I mention here as science 1.0 and science 2.0. Then in between there's 3 major developments towards open access, more open access, because we've done quite a bit in that domain already, towards fair data, and this arrow is not by accident thicker and heavier, because this is a much more difficult task. I tend to say the following: if we would have 50% of the relevant research data as fair as possible 20 years from now, so 50%, 20 years from now of the relevant data, and relevant is the data considered relevant by the scientists themselves, of course, then I would be rather pleased. And as fair as possible means the development of the FAIR principles at that moment in time in the future. The third development is the development of involving citizens more in asking the questions, in looking at the answers, but also in doing the research itself sometimes. And the combination of those 3 is what will lead us to the future of science. But there are a number of boundary conditions. We can only do this if we have people with the right skills, if we have the right reward system in order to stimulate this, and if we have the right metrics in order to monitor where we're going. And those, let's say, 3 developments with these 3 boundary conditions, we tend to call the transition that we give the name open science, and this is what we're trying to stimulate and support. Then the difference between open data and fair data. Open data is a collection that you can find on the internet, freely take and freely use and reuse and combine. Fair data is data that are made as fair as possible, and FAIR is an acronym. It stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And there are 15 principles underlying this acronym, which are being developed over time also. And making data as fair as possible is the way to express it, because it's not fair and definitely not unfair. It's always some percentage on the scale of 0 to 100% fair. Of course, if we do research and are paid by public money, we tend to make data as fair as possible, first of all, and open as possible. They will never completely overlap. There's, let's say, personal security reasons, privacy reasons, and other reasons why data cannot be open, but data can always be fair. So, as fair as possible and as open as possible are the two directions we should aim for as much as possible, especially with publicly financed research. Okay, what is in this? I think it's important to use these two definitions in order to understand. If I use the word data, that I talk about fair data. By the way, if I say data, I mean much more than traditional definition of data, but I'll come back to that in a minute. And if I use the word open science, in what context I see this. The European Open Science Cloud is to stimulate the development of the EOSC ecosystem. And the EOSC ecosystem is the ecosystem in Europe to reduce the fragmentation, to enable interdisciplinarity, to support open science, to stimulate the emergence of a competitive sector, to give a global lead to Europe. But the task initially of the EOSC Association will be to develop a web of fair data and services related to those data. And if I say data, I want to reiterate that I talk about basically all the items of research, input, execution of research, and output that can be made digital, in digital form. So all digital objects related to research is what I mean by the word data. So what is this web of fair data? By Ursula von der Leyen in one of her presentations last year, she mentioned it a web of scientific insight. We call it the web of fair data, and related services on top of those data will be a federative structure. So a federation of the relevant existing and future data sources. So a virtual space where science producers and science consumers come together, open-ended in range and content and services in the long run, meeting all the European data requirements as it starts from Europe, and in interaction with the rest of the world. So ultimately it will not be European only. This can only work if it's worldwide, because research and science is worldwide. Ultimately it's not about open everything, it's about fair data and as open as possible. And ultimately, it's not about only science, that's where we start for the coming period, of course, but it's about all the relevant data, also from the statistics offices in countries, also from the city councils, also from the countries themselves. And this web of fair data, well, let's say, assume that all the data sources that will be as fair and available, and not everything will be available, would be linkable as now web pages are. 30 years ago, we would not have imagined what we can do with websites that are linked with a unique identifier. If we have unique identifier for those data files, if they are made as fair as possible, and if you can combine them, make them interoperable, it's unbelievable what theoretically would be possible. Yes, a lot of combinations are nonsense, but yes, also many combinations which could be relevant are not possible today. We see as a board of the EOSC Association, the EOSC as the data infrastructure next to the E-infrastructure. And if I talk about the EOSC ecosystem, I mean the combination of this. So EOSC is the data infrastructure part and could be seen as a twin sister or twin brother of the European E-infrastructure organizations in what we call a yin-yang situation. And the last offering the store, compute and connect. So the infrastructure is offering the store, compute and connect services used by EOSC to offer the servicing of data and the creation of interoperability. And this combination, as I said, is what we call the EOSC ecosystem. One cannot exist without the others. If you have a data infrastructure with only zeros or with only ones in it, then you cannot do anything with it. And if you have data and no infrastructure to store the data, to compute with the data, or to connect to other places, it's also not very useful. Yes, you can put it on paper and in your head, but we will not make the progress we're aiming for. What are the guiding principles for EOSC? The overarching principle is the development is for research. A lot of people say, we do this for the researchers. I tend to say, no, we do this for the research. And of course, then the researchers will benefit. But the aim is not to help the individuals. The aim is to help the individuals do their work better and to stimulate and help the research activities. It is multi-stakeholder, meaning that as well the research performing, the research funding, as the service providing organizations are essential in this whole system. It's as open as possible, as I already said. It's based on the FAIR principles. There where possible, these principles will be further developed and included and used. It's a federation of infrastructures, as I mentioned. And an important item I would like to stress here is the machine actionability. I always tend to say, if you want me, I can read a Polish text, but I do not understand the Polish text because I don't speak and understand Polish. The same with the machine. It might be able to read a PDF file and take in a PDF file doesn't mean it understands the PDF file. That is machine readable, but machine actionable is one step more. In that file, in that information, needs to be the information for the machine, what the machine can do with it, what the machine is allowed to do with it, and therefore the machine actionability goes one step further than machine readability and is rather complicated to organize, but essential, especially with the large data files we're working with nowadays. Coming to the EOSC Association as an organization, it was founded by 4 members in the middle of last year. The 4 members have no extra rights at this moment, so we have a lot of members now, but these members took the initiative, talking to many others to start this AISBL, Association Internationale Sans But Lucratif, French term for a association without profit, a non-profit organization. We obtained what is called a royal degree in Belgium in order to operate in September last year, and had our first assembly, general assembly in December last year, where I was elected president and where we elected the board, which I will show to you in a minute. As I said, the dominant parties in the system are research performing, research funding, and service providing organizations. Yes, several of these organizations have more than only one function. Sometimes there is a combination of these things like research performing and service providing, for example. And so we don't put them in groups, but this is to identify the 3 angles of activity that are essential for the operation of the association. At this moment, there are about 150 members and provisional members, meaning that some 20 or so of them are members that have only been accepted by the board so far and need to be formally accepted by the General Assembly, and 60 observers, again, about 30 new ones, and provisional ones, and existing ones that were accepted in December. By the way, we treat all these members, whether they are provisional or not, in the same way. So as soon as people are accepted by the board of the association, we start to treat them as being a member or an observer in the organization. The ratio of research performing, research funding, and service providing organizations is 62, 8, and 30%. A good reflection of the reality in the European scene. We are about to sign a co-programmed partnership between the European Commission, or between the European Union, signed by the European Commission and the EOSC Association, and the MOU will be signed on the 23rd of June, so later on this month. And this co-programmed partnership will be the basis for programming the EOSC activities of Horizon Europe as the first calls that will appear this year and next year have been programmed by the SRIA, the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda, that has been written by the Executive Board and accepted and adopted by the present board of the association. By the way, on the 25th of June, 2 days later, we will have our first partnership board meeting between the Commission and the association, and we will formalize this SCRIA, and we will formalize the MOU and accept also a draft monitoring framework in order to monitoring this. So basically, if you want to join this partnership, if you want to be involved in this European development, a good way is to join the European association, the EOSC association. What is the mission? Well, this is a very broad and long-term vision which is formulated here, but it's of course to advance the European Open Science Cloud in order to accelerate knowledge, inspire education, spur innovation, etc. These are long-term goals, but also they indicate that it's not only about data, that it's not only about interoperability of data. In the long run, it's indeed about open science as a broad spectrum of activities, starting with creating a core of activities and creating the interoperability of those data. The association is there to provide a single voice of advocacy and representation from all the EOSC stakeholders in Europe. I estimate that there are about 10 times as many stakeholders as we have on board at this moment, or relevant stakeholders in Europe, but this is a thick thumb assumption from my side. The association is to promote the alignment of the European Union research policy and the priorities and activities coordinated by the association. This is done through the SCRIA, the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda, of which you can find version 1.0, which we will accept on the 25th of June on the website of the association, eosc.eu. And ultimately, this is to enable a seamless access to data in a very broad sense, including publications, including software, through interoperability services that address the entire research data lifecycle, from discovery, storage, management, analysis, and use and reuse, preferentially across borders and scientific disciplines. And this will be the major difficulties, of course, in reaching this. Not impossible, but it will take time. This is roughly the distribution. This, to be honest, is the distribution as it was before we had the provisional members accepted by the last board meeting, but it gives you an indication. I'm not entirely sure, but maybe Sara knows how many members there are in Finland at this moment. This is the composition of the board that was elected in December of last year. We have, I think, a pretty good distribution of gender. Well, as good as it could be, because all the female candidates were chosen in the board. We have a good distribution over the different countries of Europe and of the different, let's say, backgrounds of those individuals. We have deliberately aimed for a number of board members for 3 years, a number of board members for 2 years, and a number of board members for 1 year. New board members will always come in for 3 years, but this was in order to get a staggering system and not have the whole board step down at the same time. So there will be 3 board members ending this year, can be re-elected if they go up for re-election if they are elected, but new board members can be chosen at the end of this year. Then we come to the, let's say, groups that are internally in the association. There are, according to the statutes, 2 types of groups. That are the internal groups and the advisory groups. The internal groups are, let's say, the finance committee of the association, which we, by the way, still have to form. And we are now concentrating on forming 5 advisory groups, which include internally in those advisory group task forces. And probably the best way to look at this is to concentrate at the task forces, which I will mention in a minute. So this is a structure to allow the association members to help steer the implementation of EOSC. The groups should liaise with EOSC projects or EOSC relevant projects, with S3 projects, with regional EOSC infrastructures and projects, and offer feedback and advice to the association, which, and that's the next point, will end up in the next version of the SCRIA. This SCRIA will influence the Commission. The Commission is committed to use this SCRIA as the roadmap for their planning for the Horizon Europe program with respect to EOSC. And in this EOSC part of Horizon Europe, they have devoted 490 million euros for the coming 7 years. By the way, that means that the association has to commit for the same amount, 500 million euros over the coming period of 7 to 10 years as a in-kind contribution from all the parties, all the stakeholders involved in this development. Another side remark is that the MOU is until the end of 2030 because it includes also the period the last projects of Horizon Europe will run after Horizon Europe itself. And the EOSC association members can and have proposed and can lead groups. I'll come back to that in a minute, and externals can also be members. We have identified 5 advisory groups: implementation of EOSC, technical challenges of EOSC, metadata and data quality, research careers and curricula, and sustaining EOSC. And within those 5 advisory groups, there are 13 task forces, rules of participation in the compliance monitoring, PID policy and implementation, research engagement and adoption. These are examples of implementing EOSC. Then the technical challenges, the technical interoperability of data and services, the infrastructure for quality research software, with special attention in this case for software, which is usually not getting enough attention according to us, an AAI architecture, authorization authentication infrastructure. Metadata and data quality contains semantic operability and fair metrics and data quality. Then research careers and curricula contains data steward curricula and career paths, research careers recognition and credits, rewards and recognition, an important issue, of course, in the whole discussion in Europe. Upskilling of countries to engage in EOSC is a special attention of one of the task forces. And finally, the advisory group on sustaining EOSC contains the defining of funding models for the service providers and the long-term data preservation issues. How are we convening these groups? We have proposed these set of topics. We have had a community consultation on these topics, then revised them, and then we opened a call for applications to draft the charters. There were 255 applications received to help drafting the charters. We were a little bit overwhelmed by that, to be honest. We have identified a small team per task force and a few coordinators to steer the drafting. And roughly there are between 10 to 25 people in these drafting groups, and they are operating at this moment as we talk. The aim is to have these charters ready by the symposium or before the symposium next week of EOSC. Basically, they should be ready this week. This is a proposed template. I will not run through it. You will get the sheet so you can look at it, but the aims, the core activities, the duration, the methodology, but also the membership. This could be different from, let's say, task force to task force. Then we have identified or asked board members to liaise with the different task forces grouped in the 5 advisory groups. So Suzanne Dumouchel is interacting with the implementation of EOSC groups. Ignacio Blanquer with the Technical Challenges Group, Sarah Jones Metadata and Data Quality Group, and the Research Careers and Curricula are done by Willem Wiedmark, and Sustaining EOSC by Bob Jones. Now, this is the charter writing to form the task forces, and then the question is who will be the task force members? That is still to be defined, but we will have another call for all the members, for all the observers, to come with proposals for wanting to be a member of the task force. Of course, those that have been drafting charters will be considered as, but they have to, stick their finger up again, but will be considered as, of course, interested in that particular task force. Task forces can also have people from outside. So in this second call, the question is, what criteria will we use for selection if necessary? If not necessary, then everybody interested can join such a task force. But if the interest is too large, the task force may, let's say, decide to work in instead 2 layers, a core task force and informing the larger community. But the focus will be on the relevant skills for delivering the task at hand. We will prioritize, of course, association members and observers to become members of the task forces. We will also prioritize people who can add value to EOSC and ensure that the research community can give their input. So the research community is, of course, the community for whom we do this. We will include key project representatives responsible for the implementation, and then ensure diversity and balance in terms of gender, country, career stage, stakeholders, etc. Of course, this will not work individually for each individual task force maybe, but if we look at the whole spectrum of task forces, we should have a good distribution over Europe. We should have a good gender balance. We should have a good, let's say, distribution of the different stakeholders. So then the question arises, who will share these task forces? We will ask each task force to make a suggestion for the chairs of the task force. So every member of a task force can propose to share such a task force. And the board ultimately appoints, according to the statutes, the members and the chairs of those task forces. We will ask each of the task forces to come up with 2 chairs, 1 male and 1 female, so it can be co-chaired. And we intend to bring a balance across all the task forces in terms of stakeholders and countries, as I said before. My last slide is EOSC on a global stage. This whole development is only worthwhile if we do this in conjunction with the rest of the regions in the world. Already at this moment, if we are accepting in the near future service providers to become part of this EOSC system, then these service providers can come from third countries, but they have to adhere to the EOSC rules of participation and, of course, the applicable legislation here in Europe. But EOSC will work with other regional initiatives. We are already doing this. We are having discussions with them. We form an informal group, and we look then at organizations like, for example, CODATA, GoFair, RDA, and the World Data System that work on a world stage. But we're also looking at the different regions. So we have an informal network with the United States, with Australia, with Canada, with Asia, etc. And this is to see to it that we ultimately implement a global open science commons or global open science research commons. With that, I would like to thank you for the attention, and I will stop sharing and give the floor back to Anu, or to Sara, I don't know, who will probably have a call with some questions for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I have a quick question before I go. I see a couple of questions in the chat. Sara, you had an idea of a poll. Do you want to run that, or do we first take the questions in the chat? What do you suggest?
Yeah, maybe I suggest that we launch the poll in the meantime, so people can answer while we are taking the current questions. So Anu, if you can launch the poll. So it's just one question, and as actually Karel stressed that EOSC is a collective effort, so we want really to understand what's your current engagement in EOSC, or maybe your planned future engagement in EOSC. So that would be really useful for us. So please spend a couple of seconds on this question, and that's it. So Anu, I hand it over to you. I think we can start with the questions as well.
Anu, I see 2 questions. Do you want me to start answering them?
Yes, please. I can raise the first one. So everybody should know 2 things. So everybody should see the poll on their screen. So choose the choices which apply to you, and then at the same time we start with the questions. And let's take the first one about the task for subjects. So how were the task force subjects chosen? And is this static, or will the task forces, so to speak, come and go with time and while the EOSC evolves?
Yes, Hans, thank you for this question. A good question. The short answer is it's not static. They will come and go, and they will evolve with EOSC. But the somewhat longer answer is we have come up, based on the previous working groups we had in the previous governance period of last 2 years, with suggestions for advisory groups and for task forces, then discussed this in different gremia, and then had an inquiry with the whole community of members and observers on what task forces they wanted. So this is the input based on the input from all the members and observers. That led to this group of advisory groups and the task forces in these advisory groups. They have a mandate for 1 or 2 years, depending on what they choose as a group themselves. And after that, they can be restated for a next period if needed, or can dissolve and new tasks can come up. So in this way, we can generate new task forces over time if needed with the topics. These task forces, in my view, are somewhat different than the working groups we had in the past and many of the working groups in other organizations. The main aim for me, as the way I see it, is that these task forces will contribute to the next iteration of the SCRIA. So they have to be able to connect to the different projects, to connect to the different organizations, to have the input. Basically, they should look at what white spots are there in the domain of the EOSC development that needs to be addressed first in order to advise the Commission, which the Partnership Board will do. And there we sit together with the Commission with respect to the calls for 2023, 2024, and then the calls after that in the Horizon Europe program. That doesn't mean they cannot do anything else, but that's an important, let's say, task for the task force. And in this way, they contribute to the EOSC development.
Thank you. And the next question is also related. You kind of touched a bit about this. So we also have ongoing EOSC projects.
Yep.
So how would you comment how the task forces which are now starting are collaborating or planning to collaborate with the ongoing projects?
Yeah, I already mentioned a little bit of that, but elaborating on that, the aim is, of course, let me first start by saying we should formally make a distinction between EOSC projects that have EOSC that come from EOSC calls in Horizon 2020 and future EOSC calls for Horizon Europe. Future EOSC calls in Horizon Europe, all the projects will have several boundary conditions to automatically link them to the partnership, to automatically link them to the association. So they have to report there, they have to make things as fair as possible, etc., etc. So there are a number of boundary conditions for the new projects, which unfortunately did not exist for the old projects yet. So we come from what I call a divergence phase, where there were different projects with different interests and different angles, and well, things were not necessarily converging. Nevertheless, a lot of valuable output came out of these projects, and our task is now to see to it that we, as much as possible, pick up the valuable output. Doesn't mean that everything can be picked up. And of course, formally, the outcome of those projects is owned by the consortia that created those. This will be different also for the Horizon Europe projects. They have to share their outcomes with the association so that the association can make use of that if they think that is useful. So the aim of the task forces is to look at other task forces, and we did already look at other task forces, and we are already talking to the cluster projects and to the S3 projects, and to see what task forces are there in order not to duplicate and to bring together as much as possible. Let me give you an example. In the domain of landscaping, there's quite a bit of activities going on from different groups, so we're trying to bring this together. And on top of that, there is the so-called expert group of the Commission which is called the EOSC Steering Board. That's the name of that expert group, which also has a subgroup aimed at the landscaping. The advantage of that is that these are representatives from the countries, usually coming from ministries, from the member states and from the associated countries. So the aim is again to bridge between that group and the groups that are involved in the landscaping activities, and to bring together the landscaping activities of EOSC Future, of the EOSC cluster projects. And yeah, this will be a task in itself, but overall aim is to converge rather than diverge, as we have seen the last 5 years.
Okay, then there is one question about which has to do with the future of EOSC and the global science and the fact that there are other similar initiatives around the world. So international collaboration obviously is crucial in science. How is EOSC going to interact with other similar initiatives from other continents? And maybe I can also add here, if you can say briefly also about, for example, Gaia X. So both this about around the world aspect, and then various different kinds of initiatives. So how would you position EOSC towards those at the moment?
Let me start, Anu, with Gaia X. We've had one workshop with Gaia X. We have another one scheduled for the 30th of June between EOSC Association and the Gaia X organization. We are planning to invite EOSC Future Project there and the Commission there, so that we have the major stakeholders with respect to setting the scene together in that second workshop. We have agreed that we will continue these series of workshops to work together. Gaia X made clear in the first workshop that they aim for a core to be created very similar to the core of EOSC. So I'm proposing and discussing with them the possibility of jointly creating a core system. Their core should be open and freely available for everybody, as well as our core. So as far as I can see, there is a huge overlap between the intentions of their core and our core, and it would be a little bit silly to create two of them next to each other in Europe. That's an example. And with respect to the other regions of the world, we are actively talking and setting up an informal group, as I mentioned, with the United States, with China, with Australia, with Canada, with RDA, with GoFair, with the World Data System, and with CoData. And this, as I said, an informal group of let's say, people like me. I'm a member of that group. This is being formed at the moment, that at those regions have enough impact and overview in order to bring together activities that need to be brought together. Of course, we cannot control what other regions are doing and the other way around, but it's absolutely essential that over the long run, this converges to a similar system for all the regions in the world, like the World Wide Web. Therefore, we call it the Web of Fair Data. It would be nonsense to create a Web of Fair Data for Europe.
Okay, then I would have a question. And this takes us back. This is a very, very basic, kind of a reminder to all of us about the association. So could you still briefly tell what is the difference between a member organization and an observer? So member status and an observer status. And before this, I say that we from Finland at the moment, so CSC is a member, and then if you go, everybody can Google just EOSC Association members, and you will have the member list available, and see all the member organizations and all the observers. There are also two other organizations where the country states Finland, but those are kind of international organizations whose headquarters or the main functions just happens to be located in Finland. And then similar situations from Nordic countries, for example, and I'm really happy to see we have also Nordic colleagues taking part in this forum today. So sister organizations to CSC, but also universities, for example, from Sweden have joined. And also some Nordic funding organizations have joined. But okay, so member and observer, what is the difference?
Yeah, this is a lot of questions, but relevant ones. So it's good if I elaborate a little bit more broadly on that. According to the statutes, there are members, observers, and mandated members. These are three categories to be mentioned. Members are just members of the EOSC Association. They need to be legal entities. They cannot be ministries, and they have to be based in a member state or an associated country, which, by the way, forms a problem now, since Switzerland is most likely not going to be an associated country, and we have a few members there, but that's a side remark. Then observers can come from everywhere. They can come from outside the European Union, and we do have quite a few of them from outside the European Union. And they have no voting right in the General Assembly, but for the rest, they get quite a bit of information from the association and will be involved in the activity. One of the means to link to the rest of the world again. Then we have the mandated organizations. This is a special group of members, so you have to be a member first to become a mandated member, and the organization that decides whether they are a mandated member is the government of the country. One case we had 2 ministries proposing 2 different organizations from one country. We had to send it back and say there's only one government in your country, so it cannot be that there are 2 proposals. Anyway, so the government decides who is the mandated organization. If I'm correct, CSC is the mandated organization. No, not? Okay.
So Finland at the moment, Finland has 1 member, but Finland doesn't officially have a mandated organization at the moment.
Same as the Netherlands. By the way, we are in a similar situation. We do not have a mandated organization yet, which I don't think is really very important at this moment. I was against mandated organizations, to be honest, in the beginning when we formed this, but this was pushed from the countries and from the EC. And now I'm beginning to think differently. I'll explain that in a minute. So mandated organization can be useful if they do their task according to what we think they could do. Mandated organization have for important items like the elections or the budget and a few others extra voting rights. So if something is done in the General Assembly, 2/3 majority is needed for some of the major things, not the small things, of course. And then 2/3 of the older members is needed and 2/3 of the mandated organization members is needed. Most likely this will automatically follow, but okay, that is technical details. Then the membership fee. So these are the 3 categories. The membership fee for the moment is 10,000 euro for members and 2,000 euro for observers. And in the course of this year, next year, we are going to discuss whether we can differentiate this membership fee according to the size of the organization, a number of criteria, maybe the region they come from, the type of organizations, etc. Because we realize that for many of the smaller organizations, 10,000 euro may be quite a large sum. Then another issue related to the members is, can also private companies, parties, legal entities be a member? The answer is yes. There is no limitation there, except that we have said the statutes and the bylaws are going to be made by the public members and not by the private ones. And we act according to the rules which have not been laid down formally yet, but this is the freedom of the board, that those organizations cannot share task forces or cannot be a board member. And this will most likely become in the bylaws written, and they have to accept the bylaws to stay a member, and then they accept this. There are a relatively small number of those organizations, in the order of 5 to 10 that are private organizations. But we would like to stay in touch, of course, with the private organizations. If you talk about Gaia X, they service the companies and the private organizations, and we service the public organizations. So in this sense, it's also very complementary. I think I've said most which needs to be said about membership at this moment. If you have further questions, I'll elaborate more.
Thank you very much. Maybe just a tiny follow-up. Is it possible, if you first join as an observer, kind of upgrade your status later if you decide in half a year or the year later that, hey, our organization wants to join as a full member?
Yes. You can, if you are eligible, and that means to become an observer, almost every legal entity is eligible except for ministries. Then you can become an observer, even if you're outside of the associated countries. If you want to, well, what you call upgrade to become a full member or a member, then there is a few more requirements. You have to come from an associated country as an organization or from a member state in order to become a member. There is in the chat, I think, a remark on the mandated organizations. Maybe we can cover that one.
Yes. So, and this kind of reflects exactly some of the discussions which have been taking place. So the comment says that I don't think that one mandated organization per country, one mandated is a good idea in general. And for example, in this Finnish case, we could argue that how well one organization, in this case, and CST type of organizations can represent the interests of research institutes or universities. Maybe I would make this a bit more general question. Have you had similar comments or discussions from other countries, or how do you see this? I'm not asking you to take a stance on the Finnish case particularly, but in general, how do you see this?
Yeah.
And maybe you can reflect. You said that you also are kind of your view on this has been developing.
Correct. So that's an angle, and another angle is I can put another hat on that of National Coordinator of Open Science in the Netherlands, and I can talk about the Netherlands, not talking about Finland, and leave it up to you. As I said, maybe it's good to describe the development I went through myself. As I said, initially, when this suggestion of mandated members came up, I was not very fond of it, and not only me, the executive board was not very fond of it. So it was the governance board and the commission that kept on pushing in this direction, and yeah, so ultimately we sort of had to accept it. As I also said, I have over time revised my view on this. Mandated does not mean that they have the mandate on behalf of all the organizations from that country. They have the mandate from the government to represent the view of the ministry and of the country with respect to what is relevant for EOSC. And in my view, that has also not only the benefit of having that mandate from the government, but also the task to understand that view of the government. And in my view, these mandated organizations thus have to interact properly and correctly and intensive enough with the organizations that are member in that particular country in order to have the mandate from the government to have this overall view. This is exactly what we're discussing in the Netherlands as well. So we do think that a mandated organization is possible, but this is not going to be an organization that represents all the possible stakeholders in our country. No, this is going to be an organization that sort of speaks on behalf of many stakeholders, but then based on what the government sees as the position from the Netherlands into this discussion. And in this sense, these mandated organizations could link up closer also with what is called the expert group called the EOSC Steering Board, which has representatives from the countries, and they could there align between the countries, which they are doing and trying to do already, and the mandated organization can align in the country, and this way help the alignment of thinking, developing, and working towards a common goal and converging towards something called EOSC. Let me talk for my country and not for Finland. I'm trying to convince the organizations in the Netherlands that it's not the best idea to have the e-infrastructure provider be the mandated organization. And there's a lot of debate on this in Europe, in the different countries. I've been at least in a discussion in 10 countries where the same or a similar discussion is going on. Most of the e-infrastructure organizations want to do this task because they are traditionally better staffed, they have more money, they are there for a longer time, and most of the countries have a not well organized or clearly structured set of data infrastructure organizations, if they have any. So they have repositories, they have libraries, they have sometimes organizations that take care of the data storage, etc., or help with the data stewards. Now, to be very clear, it's not impossible that the e-infrastructure organization would do this, but then they have to put on and be able to put on a different hat. So in our case, I talk about SURF, which is our e-infrastructure organization that does the store, connect, and compute. They take care of high performance computing. They take care of other type of computing needed for the data. They take care of the storage to 80% of what is in the country, and they take care of all the connections, run edu-roam with Géant. They are linked with EGI, they are linked with PRAISE, they are linked with Euro-HPC. And on behalf of the universities of Applied Sciences, and several other organizations, they do all this, paid by them and run by them, because they have a board which they have to comply with. Now, SURF suggested themselves that they become the mandated organization from the Netherlands. And I was able to stop that, to be very open and frank to you. And I said to the ministry, to the government, did you check whether this is the wish of all the organizations they are going to interact with? Did we properly analyze what is the field in the Netherlands with respect to stakeholders, and do they feel represented? Now, I'm going to quote here Catherine Steuver from Géant, an e-infrastructure organization, who was my co-chair in the executive board. She said, if you look at the e-infrastructure organizations in general, they are run by people that are competitive. They want to have the biggest storage. They want to have the fastest computer. They want to have the fastest and strongest connections. Competitive in nature. Good, because then you have more storage, you have better computing facilities, and you can better connect. But that is not necessarily the attitude you need for the data infrastructures. For the data infrastructures, you need to be collaborative and not competitive. You need to be able and willing to share. You need to be able to work on interoperability and not on being better than the others. So not necessarily the mindset of the leaders in all the infrastructure organizations is the type of mindset you would like to have for the data infrastructures. I can imagine that people have the ability to do both. I can imagine that in an organization you have people that do one and the other people that do the other and work harmoniously together. But what we are doing at the moment in the Netherlands is we first started by what we call data competence centers. They have different names in the different research performing organizations. In all the research performing organizations, universities of applied sciences, research institutes, university medical centers, basically all of them, most of them now have a group of people, individuals, we usually call data stewards, very general term for the time being, but it needs to be differentiated, that form a data competence center for that research performing organization. The next step we are working on now is to create what we call clusters of thematic DCCs, data competence centers. These thematic data competence centers are going to work on 3 domains. The health plus biosciences, so the life science in general, everything to do with genetic code as a basis. The exact and the technical sciences, so all the exact sciences and the technical sciences, and the social sciences and humanities. And these are, of course, large groupings of domain of disciplines, but we have seen in the life sciences quite some development already the last 10 years of disciplines coming together. I'm the chair of an organization called DTL, Dutch Tech Center for Life Sciences, and there we have grouped 60 organizations jointly to work on these life sciences. They come from the agricultural sector, they come from the biotechnology sector, they come from the health sector. And we've come to the conclusion that at this moment we cannot all link them together. So we have 2 groups, the health RI, and the bio part to the rest. But ultimately they use the same approaches, the same standards they're working to, etc. This is what we hope will be done as well in the exact and the technical sciences. We have an infrastructure called for Technical Universities Research Data Center, which then brings in this combination. And there is an organization called DANS and Odyssey that jointly could work on the social sciences and humanities. In total, we have about 15 organizations relevant for these data infrastructures, which is the way it is. I mean, these organizations were formed in a period of 20 last years. There were good reasons, they do good work, they try their best, but none of them is doing what we would create now if we start from a greenfield. So the discussion we started is, let's assume there is a greenfield. Let's then think what we would create with the knowledge of today, and then try to gradually go in that direction, because you cannot kill all the organizations overnight, and you cannot merge them overnight. You get a lot of hassle for nothing. So first of all, you have to agree what would be the approach from a greenfield side approach, and then how do you get there? And I could imagine that in Finland, being smaller in number of population, with what I see CSC doing, you could combine it in one organization. But I leave that to Finland. This is up to you to decide.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for the very practical explanation. And indeed, the chat, we have a comment that this was excellent, and also kind of helps hopefully us to understand all the aspects related. Time is running, and we are really approaching to the end of the webinar. So now I'm giving Anu.
Before you do that, Anu, may I take the floor once more, shortly?
Sure, briefly.
Because an important question, of course, in the mind of a lot of people is, why would we join the EOSC Association? And then my answer tends to be in line with one of the American presidents said in the past: don't ask why you should join the association, what it will bring to you. Ask what you can bring to the association. If you join the association and pay your contribution and don't do anything and don't talk to them and don't work with them, you might as well throw your money out of the window, because then you're not going to have any influence and not going to have any benefits. But the more you're involved, the more you contribute, the more influence you have, but also the more benefits you have. It's the same as joining a university association. If you do that and only pay the contribution and never show up in any meeting and don't interact with the rest of universities, you might as well throw your money out of the window, as I said. So I think it is important to realize that joining the association can be very beneficial if you also are able and willing to join the activities of the association.
This was very, very important, and kind of opens up also the longer term perspective that this is not a sprint, but you have to be ready to engage for longer, but then you also can reap bigger benefits. So thank you very much, Karel, and thank you for all the questions and comments in the chat. And I want to highlight that especially all our colleagues from Finland, you can always send more questions to Sara Garavelli and Anu Märkälä at CSC, also to my colleague Juha Haataja at the Ministry of Education, Science and Culture, and myself here at the Academy. We have a national coordination team which meets up regularly. So whichever question, I can guarantee that we will find the right person to answer. So get involved. But now, Sara and Anu, thank you.
I just wanted to add a couple of extra comments to this. And one is that, I mean, looking at the poll, I'm very pleased to see that there are organizations planning to join the association. And that's really a good, news, because that's what we are really looking forward. So we want to see indeed a higher participation from Finnish organizations into the association. I'm less pleased to see that there are, it seems that there is less interest in contributing to the advisory groups. And I think that this is also an important thing to think about, because I think we have great expertise and skills in Finland. So this should be another incentive to be part of the EOSC. And then my last remark is really to remind you that just to close the context, we have the association and all the European efforts, but at national level, we have the Finnish forum, and we built it really with the purpose of bringing together all the actors. So that's also a way to share experience, doubts, and challenges that we have. And that's all I wanted to say. Anu, I don't know if you want to say something as well.
I can briefly tell you a little bit how to join our Finnish forum. So first of all, it welcomes all individuals who are interested in EOSC and committed to the Declaration for Open Science and Research. So no official endorsement by your organization is requested. It's enough if your home organization has signed the declaration. And the membership in the Finnish forum is free of charge. And I've added here the registration form for your convenience. And on the right-hand side, you see the communication channels where you're going to find information on our events and activities, and also the social media links. And most importantly, the email address, EOSC FF support address that goes to Sarah and myself. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to us through that email list. And one final important note is that the membership in Finnish Forum does not substitute the membership in the EOSC Association. It's good to remember that these are two separate things. And also a little promotion for the EOSC Symposium that will take place from the 15th till 18th of June. And after that, EOSC Finnish Forum will organize an EOSC Cafe for our members to discuss and digest a little bit what was presented there. So stay tuned, and if you're not a member, remember to register, and you will receive information on the upcoming EOSC Cafe and all other events through the email list that we have out for our members. Thank you.
So thank you, everybody, and I wish you a very good week, wonderful, nice summer week, hopefully also in the Netherlands.
Sun is shining, sun is shining.
Excellent. And still one more time, a special thank you for Karel and all of you who participated today. So looking forward to seeing you and hearing you in the next events. Bye.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
And thanks to you, Anu, for sharing.
I will send my slides to you, Sarah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Have a nice day.